we got two graphs and one graph right here, okay? So if this is our fitness level, this line right here, FL for fitness level, again, the overload should be here. The dotted line is the overload. I've got a lot of action right here, a lot of action. What's going on, everybody? It's Hopper. We got another video. We're coming back at you. We got the Ultimate Warrior. We got Brutus in the house. Today's topic will be the fat burning zone. Ooh. The fat burning zone. I detest this idea, this topic of the fat burning zone, because it's true and it's not true. And it's mostly not true than it is true, if that makes any sense. So today I will write some diagrams, a couple items on the board. As usual, we will have the other diagrams coming through on the video down here, sometimes maybe up here, depending on what I have presented here. And so just follow along with those and you'll see more exact examples of what I plan to discuss up here. Here will be kind of the rough drafts, everything for brevity, something that's a little faster. So first thing, the fat burning zone. It is this idea that if we work out at a little bit lighter of an intensity versus a stronger intensity, that the primary fuel source will be fat versus a carbohydrate. It ever so slightly implies that the use of carbohydrates throughout an exercise or an activity is less preferred than the fuel source for the fats. And it's just not as productive as it could be. And even Brutus agrees.
Of course.
So the first thing we will discuss here when we have the fat burning zone is if we have a chart kind of like this, and up here, this portion of the chart versus this portion of the chart, these are two different portions. You're gonna have your 80% of your maximum exertion. And down here, this portion right here, you'll have about 65%. So an easy way to gauge this for everybody is if we're at 80% on that scale of, we'll just call it 1 to 10, an easy way to gauge this is if someone could not have a conversation. As I've previously discussed, fitness levels are relative to the individual. And if someone is a professional athlete versus someone that only works out twice a week, they could each work out at 80% of their maximum exertions, and they could each be on a treadmill right next to each other. And if both parties work out at the same 80%, they would have different work rates, but the general feel of that activity is going to feel the same for each person. If we're at 80% here, and down here we're at 65%, this percentage of perceived exertion, we could carry on a conversation. We could converse with a partner. And that is where this whole idea of the fat burning zone occurs. And is it true to a certain extent? Yes. As our bodies are at lower intensities, the primary fuel source starts to become the triglycerides. I actually have a video where I discussed eating the carbohydrates for higher intensity exercises. I'll put it in a card right up here. As we move into lower intensities, the fuel source, yes, will generally be the triglycerides, where we have your carbon, your hydrogen, and your oxygen at 18, 32, and 2. And the amount of hydrogens on here will require the oxygen necessary to be broken down. Ultimately, a fuel source we want is to regenerate the ATP. And for the ATP, a brief discussion on that, if we have your actin and your myosin fibers right here, here's your actin, here's your myosin, we need this ATP right in through here. As these tissues slide past each other like this, you have your actin, you have your myosin, they make that contraction, and now we have ADP. And then it just moves on. And eventually this ATP will run out and we need a fuel source to regenerate the ATP. And if we're at 65% of your maximum exertion, we'll call it for 30 minutes. For 30 minutes, that lower intensity versus the 80%, your body will have a natural tendency to shift towards the use of triglycerides for the fuel source, which in theory, you could be burning fat while you exercise. But here is the caveat. When we're at 80%, the fuel source will start to shift towards the carbohydrates, which are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen at 6, 12, and 6. at this higher rate of work, we stress out our cardiovascular system much better than we do down here. We just don't do as much of an overload, as much as a stimulus at 65% of our work capacities. So is the fat burning zone true? Yes, it is. However, an item that this fat burning zone does not account for is what's called your EPOC. And I'll draw that up right now. EPOC. E-P-O-C. This stands for, I'll put the chart down here, stands for excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. We'll just abbreviate that to consumption. This is the amount of oxygen required to be consumed by our bodies after we finish a workout. It's extremely similar, almost arguably identical to a car. As soon as we shut the car off, the car is done with the mechanical work. We're no longer driving the car. But the car is still warm. The car's engine is still hot from the combustion, and it needs a little while to cool itself off. The harder and faster we drove that car, the longer it will take for that car's engine to cool off and come completely back to homeostasis. The EPOC right here, if we have a graph just like this, if we have our time and then we had our work capacity, WC, our work capacity right here, and we worked out, and we finished our workout right here. Okay, so we'll finish the workout. We use a different color now. So all of this, even before this y-axis right here, we'll go y, we'll go x. Even before this y-axis back here, we generated our workout. We were above our normal levels of fitness because we wanted an overload. And now we're here, we finished the workout. And then now the mechanical work of the activity is done, but the physiological work is not done. So we're here. We have a fast component of the EPOC to slow ourselves down, and then we have a slower component. We go. And then eventually, depending on how intense the workout was, the body eventually comes back to homeostasis.
I'm a big fan of homeostasis. Do you know what that is?
Of course not.
Yeah.
Where everything is equilibrium. And to further review, if we have our fitness level, we'll go here. If this is our fitness level, this is a whole nother graph. Let's do this real quick. We got two graphs and one graph right here, okay? So if this is our fitness level, this line right here, FL for our fitness level, again, the overload should be here. The dotted line is the overload. Okay, I've got a lot of action right here, a lot of action. So fitness level, overload. So if we were following the overload principle correctly, and we worked out the blue line, and then we finished right here, once we stop, then the body wants to get rid of the sympathetic activity in the body. The parasympathetic nervous system starts to take over. Parasympathetic will start to engage right around 100 heartbeats per minute. And as we're coming down, then the body starts to cool itself off, and it's all the oxygen required to get back to homeostasis. If the overload that we have is not very sufficient, this amount of time that it takes for our body to cool itself down will be less significant. Maybe it's to here, okay? And the whole point, again, to train to exercise is to generate an overload and to move our bodies away from homeostasis. If there are any questions on this, please leave the questions down in the comment section below. If we consume carbohydrates as a fuel source, there you go. The amount of time that it takes for our body to cool itself down and return completely back to homeostasis is arguably greater, because we can operate at higher work capacities when we utilize carbohydrates due to the fact that the carbohydrate bond is so much smaller at the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen at 6, 12, and 6. Versus the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen bond at 18, 32, and 2 if we want to use this as our fuel source.
Wait a minute, what are you doing, Doc?
I need fuel.
The EPOC, after our workout is finished, if we were to use triglycerides as our fuel source, is nowhere near as vast as the one that we use if we were burning carbohydrates. We can operate at roughly 80, 90% at our maximum fitness levels when we utilize carbohydrates versus when we utilize the triglycerides. The fat burning zone does not account for this EPOC. It doesn't count for the oxygen required to recover after we finish the workout. If we utilize the fat burning zone, the workout itself will not be that demanding. We could arguably carry on a conversation while we do this exercise, and it's just not that effective on our cardiovascular system, on our stroke volume, any of those items. To further demonstrate the fat burning zone, we'll use this chart right here. So an individual performs an exercise for 20 minutes. In the first example, if they perform this exercise at 65% of their maximum work capacity, let's just say they burn 300 calories. So we have 180 calories and 120 calories combined together for 300. The blue is the fat, the red is the carbohydrate energy. Over here, this individual performed the same activity for 20 minutes at 80% of their maximum work capacity. And again, the red is the carbohydrate fuel and the blue is the fat fuel. As we can see, the carbohydrate fuel source was 280 calories out of the 500, which means that the 280 calories was a higher percentage of the fuel source from the carbohydrates out of the 500. And therefore, the fat was less than 50% of the overall fuel source. When we look at the exertion of 65%, the main fuel source here was actually the fats, the triglycerides, because we burned 180 calories of the triglycerides from that 300 total overall calories. Only 120 calories was consumed from the carbohydrate source. The percentage is higher. We're above 50% of our fuel source from the fats of the total overall 300 calories. Over here, we're below 50% of the fuel source of the 500 calories. Where this is inaccurate is that the total overall calories, the 220 fat calories from over here, is of course greater than the 180 calories from the 65% of the exertion. Is the fat burning zone correct? Sure. Yes, the primary fuel source was the triglycerides, the fats, at 65% for 20 minutes. But an individual can consume more fats and triglycerides if they perform at 80% for 20 minutes. It's just the percentage is different. We know that 220 is greater than 180, but this is where they have the fat burning zone. With respect to fat loss, weight loss, this only works if we have a caloric deficit. So for here, if an individual consumes 200,000 calories a day and they burn 2,000 calories a day, there's got to be equilibrium. If we consume less at 1,700 and we burn, let's call it 2,500, then there's a difference right there of 800 calories. We'll call it per day. If we do 800 calories times 7 days, then we have 5,600 calorie deficit per week, which is about, you could call that maybe 1.3, 1.5 pounds of fat loss per week. We'll go per week. 3,500 calories exist in 1 pound of adipose tissue. So provided that an individual is at a caloric deficit and they operate up here at 80% and avoid this idea of the fat burning zone, they'll have better cardiovascular function, they'll improve their stroke volume, they'll improve their capillary density, they'll basically get more out of that activity, plus they'll spend more total overall calories, they'll improve that EPOC, that amount of oxygen that we require after we finish our workout, And it's just so much more beneficial to function at these higher work capacities. Of course, safety is the first concern when we're looking at the 70, 75, 80, 85% of max work capacities. So when does this fat loss actually occur? So fat loss will actually occur while we sleep.
Hey!
And I know that sounds crazy, but think of it this way. Provided that our bodies are at a caloric deficit and our bodies are bathed in oxygen while we sleep, we will utilize this fuel source, and this is how we will actually lose weight. Again, we will maintain the glucose and the glycogen for other activities, mostly brain function, and activities that require higher rates of work, a fuel source that's easier to break down. We do not want to necessarily focus on fat loss throughout our training. While we train, we want to focus on generating the bone density, improving our cardiovascular function, building the strength, building the skill set.
Come on. Are you 11? Oh.
And we need a fuel source that's easy to break down and regenerate ATP, which is why we want to focus on maintaining adequate amounts of carbohydrates, even if our objective is for fat loss. So that's it for this video. For those of you that wish to support this channel, there are links below to donate. At the very least, please like this video, subscribe, share this content, leave questions below in the comments if there are any, and/or start a conversation. And we will see you all next time.